Welcome to Between Plays Stock Market Strategies. Okay, everybody, today we have a special treat. We have John Kaiser of Kaiser Watch, kaiserresearch.com. I suggest everyone to head over to Mr. Kaiser's website. Lots of educational, interesting things over there, but we'll let Mr. Kaiser speak about that himself. Hello, John. How are you doing today?
Albert, it's a pleasure to be on your show for the first time. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it too. It's quite exciting for us over here at Between Plays. It's a big step up, that's for sure, having you here. You know, John, I know about you. A lot of my friends know about you. You've been around, you know, the game a long time. People should definitely listen to you. I like to just ask you for, you know, the new investors out there and stuff like that. If you just go a little bit into your background and just tell us a little bit of, you know, what you've done. I know what you've done, but just for the new guys.
Well, I was originally going to be a computer programmer type, and I should have done that. But in college, I got distracted by philosophy and the meaning of life. And that was kind of a waste of time because I discovered there was no meaning to life other than what you create for it. And I wandered into the brokerage sector just by accident in 1982 and never left it. It was the Vancouver resource sector. I learned how the juniors worked. I moved to the United States in 1994, launched what was the Kaiser bottom fishing report at the time. When the internet came along, I created this website platform. And because I did independent research, I needed to see the entire universe. So that got me on this track of collecting all the information, making it available, and then thinking what's important, and then finding it and presenting it to my audience. And Kaiser Research is now what? It's basically, I've been at it for 40 years. So I've got 40 years of experience in this sector. And people ask me, when are you going to retire? And I say, yeah, that's insane. This is so much fun, tracking down these companies, finding their stories, especially with the bottom fish angle, where there's a missing piece, where you figure out what it is. And sometimes you can even help that company. And of course, if you're buying the stock while you're helping the bottom fish and they succeed and finally get traction, well, then you get the reward with, even if you have a modest subscription base generating the revenue side of the equation.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It is very exciting because once I started getting into this, I could totally understand, you know, just investigating the stuff, trying to find those new companies, those high growth. It's exciting. It's absolutely exciting. And then you see your portfolio growing at the same time. There, you know, that's the end
not
result.
So much the last 4 weeks.
You know what? Absolutely. The last 4 weeks has been pretty bad. It's my 4 weeks has been, I think that everybody's portfolio is just suffering right now. I don't think it's just a wonder. It's probably some people are being margined out, the whole 9 yards. God knows it's not pretty. And now we're talking about in Canada that the real estate, you know, all the interest rates are starting to go up and stuff. It's pretty scary. It's pretty scary. It's not good. Yeah. But you know what? Actually, on that topic, and my subscribers know I need to wear my glasses. And so I'm going to get into this right now with you, because that brings us to a great macroeconomic question. All right, and that'll lead me into my first question with you, John. So basically, given the state of the worldwide macroeconomic environment at this moment, you know, in the mining sector, you know, should Canada and United States continue to import minerals and rely on other countries, or basically should we be mining our own?
Okay, that's part of a very big question. There is a big sea change going on right now, and I'm going to share my screen here and put up a graphic so that it's easy to see.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So what we have here is going back to 1970, the percent of global GDP represented by the United States, the blue here, and the pink, which is China. And the green in the background is the total in US dollars, not inflation adjusted, over the decades. And this is what the IMF projects is going to happen over the next 5 years. Though at the moment, we're all kind of worried. Oh boy, looks like we might actually be going into reverse. But it is this trajectory, this convergence between China and America by 2027 being almost equal GDP. That is the huge talking point. And when this all started, in the 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the world opened up, globalization became the real thing, and all production capital moved into these lower cost jurisdictions like China. And basically the multinationals bootstrap China's emergence from nothing into now a competing power. And the hope always along the way was that China, even though it started out as some sort of communist capitalist hybrid, would eventually become more a democracy like the rest of the world. That, since 2012, when Xi Jinping became the leader, is not happening. It's going into reverse. And now the world's facing the showdown between autocracy and democracy. And we are seeing, like this week, there was the Davos Forum in Europe, where the talk is about the end of globalization. And the problem is that China, because it's such a low-cost jurisdiction and is able to dump costs downstream on people who have no say in anything, and started off with a base of people who were, poor and eager to work, it has managed to gain a major share of global supply, and especially with minerals. They are a big producer of a lot of minerals, but they're also a big processor and refiner of minerals mined elsewhere in the world and shipped to China, where it's cheaper to convert them into the end products that the manufacturers use. And the crisis which COVID helped accelerate is a supply chain crisis, also coinciding with the rise in the whole ESG phenomenon, where people are saying, I care about the future. I want to know where the materials come from that go into the products that I consume. And for the past 30 years, that was all glossed over. China exported deflation to the rest of the world. Everybody was happy that they could buy goods that seemed to be getting cheaper all the time. And that is now ending. Okay, so here's an example of the American economy, which is 24% of projected GDP for this year, and China and Russia combined are 22%. So with those two together, they are effectively equal already. And we know Russia's an autocracy, worse than China, and they've now declared that they are best buds forever, no limits. And so we have a showdown looming between this Russia-China axis and the rest of the world. And that becomes a problem because we're going to see the world fragment into several different economic trading zones. And a variation of this graphic I've been presenting since about 2008, when I began to sense that the way things were going on the global stage, we would not see globalization last indefinitely. And that is now coming apart. So the question is, if China ends up controlling that whole Australia, Asia quadrant, and Russia does succeed in ultimately controlling Europe, if we say get a Republican administration led by somebody like Trump, who says, screw the rest of the world, we're retreating to the United States, we don't really care about the rest of you, Europe's going to end up under the control of Russia. And Africa, of course, for a while has been up for grabs, but the Chinese have moved into Africa. They control much of the supply there. They make sure it gets diverted to their economy. So your question is, in this type of scenario, really important, where are we going to get our raw materials from if suddenly we are in a hostile trading relationship with the China-Russia axis? So here is why your question is super relevant. These are all the key energy and metal commodities that are produced around the world. And the red bars are China and Russia production combined. And you can see, like 19 of these 40 or so, they have more than 40%. And in another 10, they have 20 to 40% of the supply. So this is mine supply. This is not the same as what I was talking about earlier, also the processed supply, where metals made elsewhere go to China to be refined and then resold elsewhere in the world. Now take a look at this chart. This is America. And remember, America has a GDP that is equal to the combined GDP of China and Russia. And look what they supply. It's a fraction of the total supply in the world, and a very small fraction, of course, of what China and Russia supply. So if we end up in a geopolitical conflict, an autocracy versus a democracy conflict, where are we going to get our share? Because China and Russia will not be shipping their raw materials to us except on their terms. And notice I've got these two here circled, natural gas and oil. America is actually a major energy producer. And that's interesting because they have the capacity to increase this indefinitely. So there's definitely going to be a need to develop new sources for places like Canada and the United States and Europe if they can keep Russia at bay. And that's why I'm so bullish on the resource juniors right now. In the past, the majors have dominated production. Big became beautiful, small, ugly. But the majors have exhausted all the easy to find large deposits. They're now in a mode of not putting many projects into the development pipeline. They're perfectly content to just let the supply demand deficits grow just from macroeconomic growth. And in the case of areas like the energy transition, where you have brand new applications creating new demand, they're happy to let their existing sunk capex produce the materials and collect a huge profit margin and pay it out as dividends and as share buybacks, and just do a big raspberry to the rest of the world saying, you think we're dirty and all that you don't like us because we have a big carbon footprint. Okay, we'll stop developing more of this and we'll just make money. You call us a sunset in industry. Well, eventually you'll figure out that the world cannot do without the physical. And they'll do like they did. They didn't understand the China super cycle until 2006. Others, the juniors, started getting it in 2002 and picked up all these deposits and pushed them into the development cycle. That whole period in the 2000s, that was phenomenal. It was the juniors who delivered the new supply at the higher real prices that the China super cycle created. And this time, because the world becomes a smaller place where the big deposits are already in production, and many of the other ones are in jurisdictions that will end up in Chinese, Russian control, or even with nationalistic control impossible to develop. There's going to be a question, where does the new supply come from? And it's going to come from small to medium-sized deposits, which the majors absolutely loathe because they require almost as much work to permit as a large deposit. So this becomes the world of the resource juniors. That's why I think the resource juniors, after a decade-long bear market, are finally set to flourish and perhaps capture the imagination of a younger audience that has been trained to shun the resource sector as something dirty and nasty.
Wow, that's incredible information. I'm sure a lot of the people out there that are watching this right now are saying, well, the question mark comes here with the natural gas and oil that we're seeing with the United States, since they have such a, they're able to produce so highly. It basically takes me into my second question, because of these facts here, given climate change, Paris Accord Agreement, and all that stuff leading us into the future, where do you see internal combustion engines versus electric vehicles? Has electric vehicles time finally come, knowing all this?
There's several ways to look at this, and one way that I look at is here's sort of the four key energy commodities that have to be mined or pulled out of the ground. And what I want to take your attention to is these little red circles here, which represent China's share of oil production, natural gas production, and uranium production. Now, we know China is headed to become the biggest nuclear power generator in the world. The United States has basically stopped building it. It is the biggest right now, but eventually China will overtake it. But it has an import vulnerability for uranium, but uranium is compact. You don't need a lot for a nuclear power plant. It's easy to ship. And ultimately, the fuel itself is a tiny, tiny fraction of the uranium that gets mined mined by the producer, because it's only the isotope, I think it's 235, which is less than 1% of your yellow cake that you mine. That gets converted into fuel. And right now we have this ironic problem that all this stuff the uranium gets, U3O8 gets shipped to Russia, where it gets converted into the energy rods that get then shipped back to all these nuclear power consuming countries. And of course, we now have this conflict with Russia. So they're saying, oh boy, I guess we're going to have to suck it up and build these things in our own backyard and make our energy fuel rods from the uranium that comes from, secure places like Canada. But natural gas and oil are bulk. These have to be shipped. And this is a huge problem for China. Now, it's the biggest producer of coal from which it generates electricity. And China is now the fastest moving country into conversion of internal combustion engine cars into an electric vehicle fleet. And they're making cheap ones. We're not there yet, really. The public isn't interested in lousy, cheap electric vehicles. They're interested in the Teslas. It's still pretty much an elite thing in places like the West. But in China, they're using these lithium iron phosphate batteries. They don't have great range. But since they all started off with next to nothing in the first place, the electric vehicle transformation is happening. But you can probably already see the paradox in this. It's all being fired by coal-powered electricity. So this is not so much China worried about reducing carbon dioxide through converting to electric vehicles. It's about escaping the strategic vulnerability of importing oil and natural gas from the rest of the world. And now notice that the United States is the top oil producer, which didn't used to be the case. 15 years ago, there was all this peak oil hand wringing, and what are we going to do? Saudi Arabia's got us by the testicles, whatever. Then shale oil fracking came along, and shale oil fracking produced tremendous natural gas as a byproduct. That actually hurt the American coal industry because natural gas was cheaper and definitely less carbon intensive than coal burning, and certainly less dirty. So you had the American energy sector shift to natural gas production. And that is a big problem here in this conflict between we need to go to renewable energy. We need to abandon fossil fuels. That's kind of asking the United States to undergo a major sacrifice in terms of its ability to keep its economy rolling with fossil fuel generated energy. They stalled nuclear energy ages ago. The timeline to develop meaningful new nuclear supply is hideous. It's 10 to 20 years. In fact, the biggest hope for the world right now is fusion. Now, fusion's been this thing that's always on the horizon. Yeah, it's going to happen in another decade.
Yeah.
But finally, we're starting to see private sector money come into fusion research. We could see by 2035, we could see commercial prototypes in operation. If by 2040, 50, fusion becomes reality, then the world's energy problem is solved. So the challenge for everybody right now is, can we manage our carbon footprint during this transition period enough to prevent that 2-degree temperature rise that's going to upset all the climate patterns, create drought, raise the sea level? That is the big question. And the will certainly is there. What I found fascinating at the end of 2020, early 2021, was that after 4 years of Trump, where he bashed climate change science and pumped the fossil fuel and said, I'm going to lower emission standards so that you car companies aren't forced to increase your energy efficiency and shift over to electric vehicles, the car makers globally absolutely ignored him. All of a sudden, at the end of 2020, we discovered that their commitment to EV development and rollout had continued unabated, had actually accelerated way more than we were talking about back in 2015, when that first sort of lithium mania 1.0 kicked in. But there is a problem now, because as we head into recession, everybody stops thinking about, okay, I'm willing to do a sacrifice for the future. I'll pay more for an electric vehicle. I'll buy goods that have got a good ESG rating. Now we're actually in danger of all of this going potentially in reverse. And this is a graphic I've been using in many of my presentations to show what I think is a huge, huge conflict coming between the boomer and older generation and the younger generations, because people like myself who's in early 60s, probably not going to live to see the worst of everything unfold as a result of global warming. So my inclination is, well, let's just enjoy everything the way it is. Let's not make any major sacrifices, because the energy transition will cost more. No question. Building all these renewable energy supplies, building in the redundancy that's required to cope with the intermittencies, that's going to make energy more expensive. So in terms of my ability to consume and enjoy myself in my twilight years, that's going to be diminished. Now, maybe I'm a sort of an altruistic person who says I'm willing to do this for the younger generations, but I think many in my generation, they are not of that attitude at all. And then there's also the problem that there is a significant component of the population, especially in the United States, that is anti-science because they are very religious and they have a belief that, well, God can fix all of this if God so wishes. We live actually in a magical world. Everything is an extension of God's will. So why should we do these things? God wouldn't let the world fall, would it? Would it? Well, I think the younger generation saying, that's probably not what we want to bet on. So I think the young people, they're pushing for this. And watch the Generation Z, the people who are the oldest one of which is 24, which is my youngest son. They right now are still kind of apathetic and sorting things out. But watch when they start getting angry. And this year already is shaping up as a brutally hot year in places like India. And we're not even in that superheated zone that everybody's predicting is coming. So I think, there are these problems with the recession coming, with a possible shift to Republican control of the all branches of the government, except the presidency in the midterm elections, and possibly with the continuation of economic misery as a result of blocking everything in Congress that might help things out, so that everybody is really, really angry in 2024 November that they bring back somebody like a Trump, who then can continue on with the sort of policies that he had. There is serious concern like that. And my biggest worry is that a resignation will shift in, and that this push for the electric vehicle build out will not happen. So it's a hard question, but we need to pay attention. Watch what the car makers do. Watch what the consumers do.
Yeah, that's very true, because I was worrying about that myself. I was saying to myself, well, where is this really going to go? I mean, because there's a lot of EV vehicles that people are looking to buy, whether it's, Ford or all these, but there's a waiting list of like a year to 3 years. And I don't know if we have enough minds out there to do all this stuff. I'm not too sure if, the older generations say, look, more reliable for the gas, but you're bringing up amazing points, because when we're looking at the heat, just about the heat, what you're talking about, I mean, in Canada, in Montreal, we were having above 30 degrees, and it's just springtime. It's not summer yet. And, we've already had 2 tornadoes.
Tornadoes?
Yeah, tornadoes.
Isn't that something for Oklahoma and Kansas?
This is it. This is Montreal, Quebec, and Ontario. And we're not summertime. We're May, 2 tornadoes already. It's incredible. And it's worrisome. So it's very true when we look at the different generations. We look at the Generation Z and where things are going. And you're right. If they decide to get mad, and they say, look, enough's enough. Well, yeah, it's gonna be interesting on how it's gonna play out in the future. And that brings me to the next question, going into I guess lithium mines, because the craze over the last few years has been lithium, but especially since 2020, It's just exponentially just shot up. Basically, my question to you is, when it comes to lithium mines, right? Do we need more? Like, how much more do we need? Do we have enough to supply us over this transition phase? Like where we're supposed to like be like totally electric vehicles are basically what's running the roads. By 2050, we should have no more ICE vehicles. And it's more of a, I guess, two-part question inside here. And how about the risks involved in the different types? Because we have the spodumene, we have the salt brines, South America, the lithium triangle, and then we have clay. I mean, do we have the technology for that? Is that viable at this moment? Because I'm thinking about companies like Nemaska, and I guess it was like 2019. I don't know if that plays a part in it, because lithium shot down, and I'm not too sure if that's why the company went out of business, because the prices dropped so much, and with spodumene, and it has a higher cost. Should we be investing in spodumene? Should we be looking more to clay, or should we be looking at the lithium triangles, more salt brines? Well, what's your take on all that?
Well, I mentioned Lithium Mania 1.0 kicking in around 2015. I think we are on the threshold of Lithium Mania 2.0 to deal exactly with this problem that you're illuminating. Now, I found this graphic in a presentation that Rio Tinto did last September, explaining what the incredible need for new lithium supply. And I've marked it up, annotated it to make clear what they're saying. Now, we are right here right now, and this is kind of a curve for demand for electric vehicles. And they've, of course, packaged it as demand for lithium. It's this curve here, this window here. This is the critical one. Now, I think they may be optimistic. This may be too steep. Maybe the electric vehicle exponential adoption won't happen until 2030. And given the timelines to bring new supply into production with all the permitting headaches and so on, we need sort of a 3 to 6 year window for the lithium to come into being. Now, based on their analysis of the current battery configurations that are likely to be in vogue when the explosion of EV purchases happens, they're talking about a 9-fold increase in current lithium supply. And they've got the, this is what's already in the sort of in production happening. And then there's this part here, 200,000 tons. And this is lithium metal that I'm talking about, which is in the pipeline. All this stuff going on in the lithium triangle in South America, everything that the Australians with their pegmatite deposits have got underway in the development. But it's this gap from here to here, which is the huge one. And that is indeed the opportunity for the pegmatites. Now, the problem is the price. What is the price? You mentioned Nemaska, and earlier there was Canada Lithium, which also went bust. But the lithium carbonate price has not been very good for very long. When Lithium Mania 1.0 kicked in, this was when the Teslas were just starting to really roll out of the factories. And the price was there $10 to $15 per pound lithium carbonate. And at that price range, it actually worked. But because they were premature, they were ahead of the curve with their supply, and the Australians were so efficient at mobilizing new supply, they actually crashed the price back to $2.50 to $3 a pound, and not much works. And this probably, there may have been some flow sheet problems with Nemaska that hadn't been properly worked out ahead, but the low price basically made any sort of production from these pegmatites not worth doing at all. But we've seen a significant increase to $36 a pound in the past 6 to 8 months. And that's due to the fact that all of this Australian supply and the brines, it's now being used up. And now they're pushing the demand of the supply. There's a supply demand deficit, which is pushing it up. And this has got people excited again. And Elon Musk even made some comment about what's wrong with you guys? Look at the price of it. You should be minting money by mining lithium, except he doesn't really understand how long it takes to find, delineate, and do the economic studies and permit new supply and make sure the hydromet facilities for converting spodumene concentrate into battery grade lithium carbonate. He doesn't really seem to understand how much time there is. And what he doesn't understand is the horrible uncertainty that always plagues the resource sector, which is, what will the price of my material, my metal that I'm going to produce be when I'm actually in production? And all these economic studies, they're all based on a base case price, which is usually some 3-year trailing average of what has been. But it's not really telling you what will be. And because it's a competitive world of many groups competing to deliver new supply at various cost structures and grades, you never know what the supply and demand balance will be and what the price will be. And one of the things that I've done with the projections of Rio Tinto is say, okay, let's say over this time period here, we take the expected lithium supply and price it at these different price ranges from $250 to $40 per pound. And what happens is when you get into this period here where by 2030, where people are really starting to adopt to buy these things all the way at like mass consumer level, not just the elites wanting to show off that they are very successful and can afford a Tesla, you're talking about a lithium market, which at that price would be worth $300 billion. Now that won't mean a thing to most people, but the entire global aluminum market is only worth $400 billion right now. So you sort of think, is lithium that important that it could end up representing a value as big as aluminum is, which is used everywhere? Common sense says no, it won't happen. So a $40 price is not realistic. So the big question for the whole lithium mania 2.0 thing is, what will the future price will be? Will it be at least $10 a pound? Can the juniors who go out there and do this start producing, count on $10 a pound? This is something that the car makers have not yet really figured out. They need to figure out what the maximum price is to allow the battery to be cheap enough for an ordinary sort of $30,000, $40,000 a year income consumer to be able to buy the lower end electric vehicle. And if the lithium price is way too high, it's not going to happen. The whole EV rollout becomes a fantasy. And if you want these crappy lithium iron phosphate batteries from China, the public's going to say, I'm going to stick to my ICE vehicle. Forget it. I'm not going to have this crappy thing that goes only for 150 miles. And then because I live in a 12-story apartment and there's no place to plug it in, I need to plug in all the time, and forget it. So the lithium question, the price of future lithium right now, is critical to whether or not EV adoption ever becomes reality. So the juniors definitely have to get in there and start to find these new pegmatites. And this graphic here, I have these for all these metals. I've collected all this data from the USGS, compiled it. I have these fantastic graphics which show what countries produced what over time. And you can really see the result of lithium mania 1.0 kicking in. This is the Australians. I mean, it's tremendous. Their country is this barren wasteland where everything's bare. There's hardly any vegetation. And pegmatite bodies are quite distinctive. You can see them from the air. You say, oh, what's that white patch down there? Okay, we better check it out. Let's see if it's the lithium cesium tantalum type that will contain spodumene. And so the Australians have been picking these up, staking it, and they pretty much control and know where everything is. And they were very efficient at mobilizing the supply. And you can see this red thing is the value based on the annual average. You can see this crash that happened. And this was very unfortunate because it put everything on hold. Like 2 years ago, I was ignoring lithium, saying, okay, at these prices, this is a complete waste of time. And now you see the result of last year's price spike, taking it up, and now we see this going. But this here, 100,000 tons, it needs to go 10 times higher in order to make those lithium ion batteries needed for the replacement of the ICE fleet by an electric vehicle fleet. And this is how it's going to happen. This is the lithium triangle you were talking about. This had become the major source of lithium for what was needed for the laptop batteries, the cell phone batteries, all these small uses, rechargeable batteries. That's where that was coming from. The Australians, they've now kicked in with the electric vehicle supply. This is all pegmatite supply. America has one little, at the Albemarle Paradise Valley operation, they've got a brine-based source of lithium, and for some reason, the US government suppresses what their numbers are because they're a private company. It's totally bizarre. But the rest of this is pegmatite country. And Brazil is also a big pegmatite potential region. So where's this new supply going to come from? Well, this will hit the maximum capacity as all those salars get tapped and set up. But because there are brine recharge cycles and there's water issues, which are of course becoming an ever bigger problem, the brines are not going to save the day. The clay stones, there's lots of clay stone type deposits in and around the Albemarle area, Clayton Valley and so. But the problem with clay stones is they're very low grade, 0.1% or so. It's a mix of other stuff. You need to get a pure concentrate, lithium concentrate out of it. So you have very high costs. Now at $40 a pound lithium carbonate, you have all the lithium you need in the world coming from clay stone deposits. But as I pointed out, your lithium ion battery is going to be too expensive and nobody's going to want to buy the cars. So the clay stones aren't a real solution because of the high processing costs associated with it. So again, the future will come from the big pegmatite rush that's coming on. And the difference between Australia and Canada is this is all swamp, moss, overburden, bush covered. So you can see them here and there. People know where these pegmatite bodies are, but and they've documented them, but they're not like, there's lots still to be found. An example was the Frontier Lithium, which found the PAC deposit in 1999 after the government, the Ontario Geological Survey documented all these potential areas. And that sat worthless for 20 years. And then 2018, they started exploring the trend and they found the Sparks deposit, which is significantly better than the first one. So now they've got a PEA out, and the stock's gone from some little bottom fish with a $20 million valuation. It's a $700, $800 million valuation right now. And that Sparks deposit solves only a tiny fraction of the future need. But this is like, for me, Lithium Mania 2.0 is going to be based on the juniors scouring these parts of Eastern Canada, perhaps even Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And Manitoba, of course, has the Tanko deposit, and they'll find these things, and there'll be hundreds of juniors. I liken it back to like when they realized there were diamond pipes in Canada, and people said, diamonds? All of a sudden, we had this tremendous diamond boom all over the place. You had an area the size of Switzerland staked to see if Chuck Fitby did indeed not get it all at the Acadie project. This, I think, we're on the threshold of happening. It needs to get the support from the investing public. I think this is a gateway for the young people, the Gen Zs and the millennials that I talked about earlier. This is something that secures their future. If they want some sort of chance of staving off this global warming cycle by replacing electric or ICE vehicles with electric vehicles, here's a gateway to find out, how does this resource sector work? And places like Canada, they're not like in Africa or Russia where there are no environmental rules. We already have tough rules. So they have to get off their high horse about all mining being dirty. I mean, even if they're going to want to live in the metaverse, they're going to have to, that metaverse is going to have to be run on some computer. And they might still have to sit on a chair and that. So they have to realize there is a trade-off between, perfect no mining fantasy where you live in a psychic world rather than a physical world, and start supporting this sector. So I am quite optimistic that this problem will be solved by Lithium Mania 2.0, which is just getting underway now. And we have Frontier Lithium as a good example of what kind of reward you can get by recognizing some, 20, 30 cent junior and helping, supporting them. And then they find one of these things and then they push it fast. The Ontario government, Quebec government, even the feds, they've recognized this. They want Canada to become a critical mineral producer. They want to support these mining of these various more obscure materials for which there's never been a market.
Okay, absolutely. So we could see with the ranges that you were saying earlier for, if it gets down to like 2 something, we got problems, but $40 is also going to create too many problems. So we do have a range where, it should settle in so that they can make it affordable, but also at the same time, make it, affordable for the regular consumer, but also make it work for the mining industry. So that's actually really, really good to know. I really appreciate that. And, we're talking about lithium and we're talking about the pegmatites, we're talking about the clays and everything like that. But there's also another thing with lithium, recycling. As recycling lithium, everything that's out there already, is that an answer? Is that a solution? What do you believe in that?
You'll see these little NGO groups saying, we don't need new lithium mines. We should just recycle it. And, I agree with the concept. For example, with lead, when the ICE car gets replaced, there's going to be lots of lead acid batteries to be recycled that nobody needs. And for a lot of these metals like aluminum, iron, nickel, copper, it does get recycled. The new supply is to feed new demand, growing demand. And of course, every product has a life cycle. So what these people who say, just focus on recycling, they're missing the database to understand this. And here is that, supply evolution chart. This is what it has been on an annual basis here, the yellow, and this is what it is on a cumulative basis. Now, almost all the lithium production until 1990 went into glassware. A lot of it came from Zimbabwe, which has the petalite type of pegmatite body, which has a lower iron content and is better suited for the glassware industry. Well, that glass, you're not going to recover that lithium because it's just doping all that glassware around the world. That's just gone. Now, the laptop and cell phone batteries, that's what this growth here is all about. That's potentially recyclable. And then what's come, this growth here in the last few years, that's brought it up to like about 1 million tons of past mined lithium metal. Well, really only about 400,000 tons of that is available for recycling, but it's in cars that are going to last another 5 to 10 years before it's available for recycling. So in 2035, 40, I showed you that graphic where Rio Tinto shows the supply or demand flattening. The demand will stop growing because the recycling will kick in, but it's not a solution for the problem now. It will be what maintains it. And of course, you have to consider that we don't know what the future battery configuration will be. There is so much R&D going into battery technology. They're looking for other combinations of cheaper metals that also avoid the explosion problem. And speaking of the thermal runaway problem, none of these assumptions that Rio Tinto makes and all the others are making about future demand allow for the possibility that a solid state electrolyte emerges, which makes lithium metal substitute for graphite as the anode. That makes the ideal battery. The solid state electrolyte prevents the dendrites from growing and puncturing and causing the thermal runaway. If that were to happen, the cars would become really, really good electric vehicles with great range, charge times, but the demand would go substantially more than the 1 million tons a year of metal projected for like that 2035 to 40 period when EVs have in fact replaced the ICE vehicles. So that's another reason to continue to pour money into finding these pegmatites. So even if you find a whole bunch, and not all of them are economic. Maybe by the time the breakthrough happens, those will be waiting to also be put into production. So it's a way of creating a future inventory of failures that can be deployed to keep the whole cycle going.
Okay. And we're looking at the lithium over here, and we're talking about solid state batteries, but there's also the other components of making up these batteries, such as components like nickel. We have some of these companies out there, like, Talon Metals, let's just say that's one of them. And my question comes to you maybe in the form of nickel. All right. In terms of pricing, the future of the EV market, do you believe that nickel will play a strong role continuing in the industry of electric vehicles? If so, will we also be a short supply over the next 5 to 10 years?
The nickel problem is I think, worse than the lithium problem, because everybody understands the lithium problem, and they're moving new supply in, and it's questionable how fast that adoption curve really will accelerate. But what we do know is that the better quality cars, the ones that require nickel in the cathode, that's what the Teslas are made of. The Chinese are moving away from it with their lithium iron phosphate deposits, batteries. Those don't require, but that type of car is going to be unacceptable to a North American consumer. So nickel, if nickel adoption happens in that early stage, you have to imagine that when this curve goes up like that, it's the elite moving down. It's people who are in the 1%, then it's the 90, the top 10%. That's going down. So nickel's going to be part of that future configuration no matter what. And that is a more real-time configuration. And for lithium, lithium's not really used for anything else except maybe glassware, but that's just a tiny fraction. But nickel is used for stainless steel. Stainless steel is going to be forever part of the macroeconomic growth scenario. That's the base load. Almost all of this supply goes into stainless steel. And here's what's been the base load for the last 100 years is Canada and Russia as major suppliers. Then you see this expansion coming here, Indonesia, New Caledonia coming in, and then you have this part, Philippines. They are now in about third or fourth place. This was as a result of an innovation that allowed low-grade laterite, the ores, to be mined and fed directly into blast furnaces without upgrading through HPAL or anything like that. And the Chinese came up with this innovation in response to the huge price spike in 2007. And it creates a lower quality stainless steel, but it is perfectly suited for China standards. Get it built fast, quick, and dirty. Don't worry about it. And that put a damper on the nickel price in the past decade. And it's only recently that it has gone up. But the whole system is really geared towards this stainless steel material, not the nickel sulfate. The nickel sulfate is made from refined nickel that's purchased from the warehouses. And that's going to be a problem for the EV people, especially the early adoption stages where you're selling this clean vehicle. The decision to buy this car that's expensive, that doesn't really pay itself off that quickly. It's partly driven by, I have the capacity to make a personal sacrifice to buy this instead of some gasoline powered fancy car. I'm going to do this. But here's the problem. When you take this refined nickel from the LME warehouse to which it's been delivered, or if you get an extra stage hooked up to the HPAL operation in the Philippines or Indonesia from the laterite ore, it is very dirty. It is very carbon intensive. And Russia's Norilsk nickel supply is dirty just because they don't give a damn. They just dump everything into the environment. It is one of the most polluted sites in the world. And so that gets shipped right now. Of course, it's not really happening because of the Ukraine invasion, all the sanctions. But when things get back to normal, hoping that they do, it ends up in there. You buy your nickel from the LME warehouse, you refine it, process it to make nickel sulfate. You're putting a dirty input into your Tesla car. This is a big problem facing the car makers, and they're starting to wake up for it. They want to be able to show where their nickel comes from. And this is also a big opportunity for moving back into jurisdictions like Canada and the United States. The Tamarack deposit is in Minnesota. They can document where it comes from. They still have the problem of, because it's a sulfide deposit, it needs to be refined, smelted to make refined nickel. And they're going to have to figure out some sort of way that it doesn't just disappear into some smelter along with everything else and becomes blended with all the dirty nickel from Russia. But 60% of all global nickel supply right now comes from sources that do not really qualify for incorporation into these electric vehicles insofar as ESG credibility is required.
Okay. And and with the Talon metals, just to look at the Tamarack deposit, just a question like that. We're talking about the smelting, so we're just a little bit worried about where that's going to happen for when it comes to companies, maybe not just them, but other companies. If other deposits are found like that, we do have that one issue that needs to be resolved.
Yeah, and there was, Talon did this deal with Tesla in January, which helped the stock up, which helped them raise a bunch of money. But it was an extraordinarily bad deal because Elon Musk is basically got a promise that I'll buy 75% of your future supply at some LME referenced price. And I'm giving you nothing in return other than my brand association. And that doesn't help them. The car makers, if they really want to secure certifiably clean supply, they need to wander upstream and start helping the companies either agree to a minimum premium price for their supply. They can reference LME price, but they say we'll pay 20% above it to make sure that we have clean nickel rather than just grabbing it from the LME warehouse. And the other thing they need to do is start helping the companies when they get into that value trough, the deep part of the S curve where the valuation's low because they're now in permitting and feasibility demonstration. It sucks up a lot of money. When the companies start shifting into this phase, they need to step in and make equity investments in these companies. And with nickel, it actually makes sense because even if the nickel ends up not being a major component of the electric vehicle battery, the stainless steel market is still going to be there. And assuming the global economy continues to grow, demand will grow. So they'll recover their nickel, pardon the pun, whether or not they ever need that nickel sulfate. And that understanding is starting to happen. I was talking to one junior company who in January, he was kind of like despairing and shaking his head about the Talon deal. He says in the last 3-4 months, and maybe this has been helped by nickel shooting to $40 a pound as a result of that short squeeze and the disappearance of Russian supply. But now the car makers, they've wandered upstream. They are now in conversations with companies with advanced nickel projects. So that's a sort of beneath the surface change that is underway. And so I think that the junior nickel space is going to be very important because the nickel sulfate demand, it needs to be clean. You can't just go to New Caledonia and have some coal-fired electrical plant making this nickel sulfate from that sort of source. These sort of alternative sources where you create the whole flow sheet and make sure it stays clean, that's a new wave that's going to help the juniors.
Yeah, because the laterites from my research, if I'm wrong, please correct me, very dirty, and the tailings right into the water, right into the ocean and stuff like that. it's
Yeah, well, that depends on the jurisdiction and
depends on
what
just,
the
yeah,
rules are for disposing of
yeah.
the leftover.
So we really need to step up in Canada, United States, when it comes to the whole processing. Like we really need to get okay. And you know that brings me to another question, because we have another component of the EV market. Well, the EV battery. Sorry. And basically, there's this whole talk now that's going on about cobalt out, manganese in, and you know, should we be looking at this very closely, the whole cobalt out and manganese in thing, and how would this, you know, affect us for the Canadian and United States market?
Well, the cathode configuration that requires nickel also requires manganese, and they've both been slowly reducing the need of cobalt. And the goal is eventually to not have cobalt as any part of the lithium ion battery. And this sort of graphic really shows you why. I mean, 65% of global supply comes from the not so democratic Republic of Congo. This place, the upper part here is still like warlords fighting each other. The cobalt coal production comes from down in this area here, but it has a history of corruption. It is unstable. It is dirty. And the other problem with cobalt is all of this stuff goes to China to be upgraded into battery grade, cobalt sulfate. And the problem is from places like the Kivu killing fields, where they have these coltan and other mineral sands in Nigeria and other places where this stuff comes from. These come from these conflict areas where even children are lassoed and made to work so that they can create cash flow for whatever little tribal wars are being fought in these areas. And that gets blended with all the properly mined cobalt in this area over here. So your cobalt, whatever you end up getting, is going to be dirty. Now, this creates a window for boutique cobalt supplies from places like in Idaho, maybe those parts of east of Sudbury in Ontario, and also for some operations where the cobalt ends up accidentally in the raffinate for heap leach operations like copper oxide leaching operations, coming up with technologies to strip that out and recover it. That becomes a verifiable source of clean. And of course, it hits all the ESG buttons by you're not wasting it, letting it go back into the pile. You are actually getting value from it. And insofar as it's something that in the tailings ends up being negative, that's by recovering it from these sources, you're doing a good thing for the whole mining cycle. And that's what will happen to cobalt for all these other applications and for the transition period. But I think in the long run, cobalt's not going to be part of the electric vehicle future.
Okay, so more nickel and manganese will be taking up those roles. And
manganese is not going to be a problem. I mean, look at that. 35% comes from South Africa. Now, people fret about South Africa with its energy problems, with its sometimes political problems. Australia is the next biggest, and then Gabon. Now, this is an African country. It's got extraordinary resources. One of them, the biggest deposits in the world, is the subject of some sort of a conflict. And then you have a variety of these other places that could supply the manganese. But this manganese goes mainly into steel making. And the quality, the purity required for that is relatively low. The manganese you need for the battery market, that's a lot of extra cost to upgrade traditional manganese deposits. So it's called electrolytic manganese, which is what you want as the feedstock for upgrading to the manganese sulfate or whatever it is that they need for the cathode. And that's certain deposits. There's a sort of niche market out there for deposits that are different from these big giant ones in Australia and South Africa, which have less of these impurities that need to be removed. And if you can find these and demonstrate that you can produce the concentrate that has that level of purity, and there is actually a separate price for electrolytic manganese, which is higher than regular manganese, that's a potential niche in jurisdictions away from the big giant ones. You're not going to bother doing that in these big powerhouse suppliers, but maybe in these other places in the world, there is an opportunity for sourcing these smaller deposits that are, we don't need the kind of extraordinary volume for the lithium ion battery sector that we need for the steel market. I mean, look at this, 19 million tons goes into steel making. So this is a niche market that there is an opportunity. It's complex, and it is definitely worth exploring. I've not invested a lot of effort in it so far, but definitely it is worth checking into.
Okay. And we were talking a lot about some solid state batteries. And there's since 2020, the end of 2020, there's been a lot of talk out there about, the future of lithium ion batteries, or the future of solid state lithium ion batteries. So my question to you, John, is basically, do you think that the solid state lithium batteries, all right, that it has its place in the future? We went over a little bit. Or do you think that maybe with the research and development and the new technology that exists, that will probably be moving away from a solid state lithium ion battery? And are they safer? That's basically the question. And it's a two-part, I guess, question here. Critical minerals, we've touched on it, like scandium and stuff. Do they have a role in the future?
So currently the batteries the lithium ion batteries have an electrolyte, which is the middle part, which is a semi-fluid, a gel. And the lithium ions travel through this. The problem as they travel from, I think it's the anode to the cathode, they end up creating these dendrites where probably the cathode, you get like spears being created through this path of this ion flow. And these spears can puncture the wrappers, the separators that hold the electrolyte. And as soon as that creates a short circuit, and that creates the thermal runaway that causes these dangerous fires. And so the whole reason they have cobalt in the cathode is because it helps mitigate this. So they got this problem. Okay, we want to get rid of cobalt because it's such an unstable input to have, but how do we prevent this dendrite growth? And so they're looking at other combinations like magnesium ion batteries, aluminum zinc batteries, all kinds of stuff. And we have no idea where this is going to lead to, but they know now what works. But the simplest is to come up with a solid state electrolyte, because that will not create this puncturing problem. And they're using materials like high purity alumina as part of this to try and create this shield. So I think this ends up becoming a material science challenge. And one of the companies I followed has filed patents for using scandium to
That's okay.
using scandium to dope materials used in the electrolyte, and even in particular the manganese. The use of manganese has its own little problems. So there is a whole pile of complicated little problems associated with these lithium ion batteries. And so these other critical metals like scandium, which have peculiar properties, they are being played with to create sort of doping. You don't need a huge amount of them. So even if they're expensive, that's not going to put the cost of the lithium ion battery through the roof. But this is all going on. And if, for example, for scandium, we saw a breakthrough like this that requires scandium, well, then scandium would have its problem solved. Now, I've been following scandium for a decade now, since somebody first did the evil thing of introducing it to me and explaining why scandium is so important. And at the time, its important was that it is the perfect marriage partner to make aluminum stronger, keep it conductive, and also corrosion resistance. You alloy scandium into it. And the Russians made their MiG fighters, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, basically by just mining this stuff at a cost above the global price for it. Everybody else avoided it because it's a dispersoid that doesn't come together the way lead does. So its crustal abundance is actually higher than that of lead, but lead can get to like a 40% vein. You can get lead concentrating that much, but the atoms, the scandium atoms, they hate each other. They try to stay away from each other. And that's what makes them so special for aluminum, because they have a higher melting temperature. They solidify first when introduced into an aluminum melt, and they create kind of like a grid structure. And then everything, the aluminum grains end up chilling around it. Apart from the doping of the electrolyte, create that solid state electrolyte holy grade, metals, a big approach for the EV cars is how to deal with the weight. These lithium ion batteries, they are heavy. And of course, if you want range, you're going to need more of them. So weight, of course, costs energy. So you've got this complex equation of a trade-off between weight and how much energy you have, how long it takes to recharge it, how long you can drive before you need to recharge. So lightweighting is the huge concept that's out there. And aluminum is the best lightweighting material, but aluminum's traditional strength is a problem. So that's where alloying and the critical minerals coming into it are getting more and more attention. And there's big fuss about magnesium because aluminum and magnesium make a really good alloy. And if you throw in some scandium, it gets even better. And the problem with a magnesium is it's a basic rock forming mineral element. A chunk of a rock from an ultramafic deposit will have 25-30% magnesium in it, but it's in a oxide form that's extremely expensive to convert into the metal that you need for the alloy business. And all that magnesium we see there coming from China, it's basically recovered from brines. They take it out of the brines where the magnesium's already dissolved. And that, of course, keeps the price relatively low. But back to what we were talking about earlier at the beginning of our session, if we have this geopolitical conflict rupturing globalization and Chinese magnesium is no longer available, then we have a problem. Where are we going to get our magnesium from? So they're becoming concerned of finding alternative sources for some of these obscure minerals like magnesium, which are very abundant. And lightweighting, of course, is a big deal for iron too. Iron is very strong, but also very heavy. And niobium is the scandium equivalent of the marriage partner for iron. Vanadium and molybdenum are also used, but niobium is the best one. And the problem with niobium is it concentrates in deposits. The Araxá in Brazil is like 500 million tons of 2.5% niobium, blows away every other little deposit in the rest of the world. So of course they totally control the market. And that's a big problem for lightweighting the iron. Canada and Ontario, we've got a James Bay deposit. And here's the perversity of it. This deposit, it's not going to replace Araxá supply from Brazil, but it could create that diversity of supply that the industry wants insofar as it relies on. And yet you have these NIMBY types and certain people within the First Nations community at Moosonee all opposing the advancement of this project, which will have a relatively small footprint, which will bring a new level of economic activity into Moosonee so that the younger people don't have reason, who are the ones that have brains, to flee to Toronto, get an education there, marry somebody else, never go back to a place like Moosonee. You actually have a chemical plant associated with the mine in that area that requires smart people to live locally, and yet the NIMBY types of principle against any sort of mining have managed to rile up the local people to oppose this. And so you have this potential critical mineral supply stalled. But in case of scandium, its big problem has been because it's so low grade, it has to have a high cost. and it's been trapped in a chicken and egg problem where the end users want the price stable, they want it scalable, and but they won't give you an offtake agreement and plan to use the material until it exists. So the 25 tons that are now produced come as byproducts from cleaning titanium dioxide waste, waste streams. It comes from some nickel cobalt operations, and it comes from the Bionoble rare earth mine in China, the biggest in the world. They managed to recover some of it from that deposit, but it hasn't been able to grow. So that's why Scandium has been a holy grail for this sector that can't crack the chicken egg problem. And this is why a recent development in your backyard, close to Montreal, I think it's about 50 kilometers northeast, a place called Sorel-Tracy, Rio Tinto has been smelting its lacteo iron titanium ore for, I don't know, 70, 80 years. And they pull the iron out and they have a titanium slag that's 80%, and they've been selling it to the pigment makers, the paint makers, as titanium dioxide. But the problem that Rio Tinto encountered recently was all the pigment makers are working with shifting to a new processing technology that requires 95% rutile grade as an input, as a feedstock. So they were in danger of losing their market for this byproduct from smelting the lacteo iron ore. And so necessity is the mother of invention. In doing the R&D to upgrade the slag to rutile equivalent so that they can continue to sell it to the paint makers, they figured out a way to recover scandium, because for some reason the scandium reports to the slag rather than disappears into the iron product. And so they've now got done a pilot test where they're producing 3 tons of scandium oxide a year. They're scaling that up to 6 to 9 tons. They own Alcan, which of course has all these smelter operations in Quebec. Alcan, all these big guys, Alcoa, they all dumped their alloy divisions over a decade ago because they were going to be just basic aluminum ingot producers. Now they're rediscovering the importance of alloys. So Rio Tinto is now becoming the solution to that chicken egg problem, because they can grow the supply gradually as they tinker with their flow sheet at Sorel-Tracy. They can feed it to their Alcan division to start incorporating it into aluminum products to make those alloys that can be used for the lightweighting sector. And because the physical limit from lacteo is about 50 tons per year, that's not going to do the trick for the world, which ultimately wants 1,000 tons of scandium oxide per year. But if they get it up to 50 tons, that'll be kind of a tipping point where these other smaller deposits in the world can start to be developed at, say, 35 to 50 tons a year. So this is an extremely interesting development. There's a company, Imperial Mining, which has identified the Crater Lake deposit as a source of scandium, and so it's doing work now. It's a remote location. It will take some time, but suddenly with this Rio Tinto development at Sorel-Tracy, there is hope that this isn't just a pipe dream. Yeah, you outline the deposit, you figure out its flow sheet, but you're still stuck raising the capex because the existing supply isn't high enough that people have an escape in case your flow sheet doesn't quite work as expected or as quickly. So I think these obscure metals like scandium, they are set to boom, and the need to lightweight stuff in these electric vehicles, almost anything that moves as a way of reducing, even with the carbon footprint, things that still require fossil fuel as an energy input. That's a key part of the push to reduce the carbon footprint that's contributing to the global warming process.
Yeah, that really is great points, because when you look at the beginning, how we started with the macroeconomic, and we're looking at the critical minerals. I want to stay on the topic, of course, of electric vehicles, but I'm just thinking of it as a whole. You have the Russia, China, and these critical minerals like scandium that makes things like aluminum strong, lightweight. It allows it to be cast, and weldable too, because without
Mhm.
the scandium, it doesn't even become. You got to use rivets, and planes and jets get heavier. And like, because I'm looking at the defense sector right now too. I mean, it's really important that we stop, sitting on our laurels, as they used to say, and we need to move forward with all these critical minerals, just as what Joe Biden has stated recently. Like, look, we have a critical mineral list, but we also have these minerals that, like, defensively, we need these. Highly important.
Fortunately with scandium, uh, until about 15 years ago, it was kind of a hopeless situation. But around 15 years ago in New South Wales, they discovered these laterite deposits where, for some strange reason, the scandium had enriched from its sort of background level of 30 to 50 ppm to into the 300 to 600 ppm range. And this is a relatively recent development. There's about 4 of these deposits that have been identified. One already has a mining lease and could be developed very quickly, except for this chicken and the egg problem. And Australia, Canada is a great place to explore for new raw material supply. United States should be also, but because a big chunk of the land's covered by a sort of a sedimentary platform. The rest is like mountainous, Rocky Mountains and that, which is also mainly sedimentary, doesn't have mineral potential. And the rest of the areas, they're not really scandium type areas. But Australia, it's a secure country. It has enormous potential for a lot of these minerals. So between Australia and Canada, both hopefully remaining democracies, and the United States itself remaining a democracy, they have the potential to be major sources of these obscure materials that we can no longer rely on places like Russia and China to supply the rest of the world.
Well, you know what, John, Betweenplays, we're so happy to have had you, pique your brain a little bit over here and go over all these. I have one last question for you. Of course, I wouldn't want to end off without asking you this last question. And it's, we spoke a lot about the electric vehicle sector, and we touched off on the critical minerals, all right, and some of the macroeconomics. I'm just wondering if you could give me some of your penny stock mining companies that have piqued your interest in the EV or in, of course, the critical mineral space, as we were speaking here now.
Yeah, I've got 3 of them in mind that tie in nicely with this this whole conversation that we've had. The first is, of course, since we were just talking about scandium, as you can see, this is like my nightmare. I started recommending it in 2010, and nobody's made any money, and it's like the cheapest, almost the cheapest it's been during this whole cycle. They have the Ningen deposit. They've got a definitive feasibility study done. It's cost 100 million tons to develop. If they dollars to develop, if they get it going, this thing can be scaled up four times in supply. It could end up producing 100,000 tons a year, and they've got a similar deposit, 15 kilometers away, that they could also develop. So this company could become a baseload, primary scalable supplier to the world. They've struggled. They got their mining lease here in 2017, and everybody was excited. But then they hit the wall and said, well, nobody wants to give us CapEx. So they decided to try and build a market by doing these R&D projects with end users. But the end users, they ended up like saying, well, it's too much of a risk for us. So they got nothing done, and they pivoted in 2020. They've been doing some research on critical metal recovery from the raffinates of copper oxide SXEW operations, and apparently lots of scandium and nickel and cobalt that ends up getting dissolved in this stuff, and that's just wasted. And because of the work that their CTO Willem Divestein had done with ion exchange technology, he came up with a flow sheet for how to recover this. And this would be fantastic because Arizona has all these copper oxide leaching operations. Freeport has about 6 or 7 of these, which could be deployed, which could take care of a lot of America's critical metal needs that are certifiably clean. But was again kind of a chicken and egg. When will they know? And the largest shareholder, basically here, you see this drop. They kicked out the current management, have taken over. They're refinancing now. They're pivoting back to developing the Ningen deposit in New South Wales of Australia. And the reason they've done that is, although for the past few years, it's been tough to crack this chicken and the egg problem, the urgency of the lightweighting problem in the EV sector and Rio Tinto's own work in coming up with an incremental supply that could gradually build the offtake market, they said, okay, we need to go back to this, hit this hard. There's patent pending on all the critical mineral recovery technologies. Let's wait until we have the patents actually granted before we, show Barrick how to do this, and then we don't get the patent granted, and they can just carry on and not make us part of it. So this company will have 414 million shares out. It's got 2 million of a $3 million financing done at 9 cents with a full 5-year warrant. Hopefully they get the rest of that done soon, and that this show finally get back on the road as the world's first potential primary scalable scandium supplier. And I own lots of shares in this one. FPX nickel ties in beautifully with our discussion about having a nickel sulfate, a clean nickel sulfate. And as you can see, this has been one of my long-term picks too. And it was fantastic here when Cliffs first was doing a feasibility demonstration work. What they have is a very low-grade deposit, 0.1 to 0.15% Davis tube recovery nickel. No such low-grade mine gets mined in the world, but it's different from all the other deposits because the mineral is a waruite. It's a natural stainless steel. So the recovery process is simple magnetic recovery, crush it, grind it, recover that portion, and then subject the rest of it to flotation to produce a 60 to 65% ferro nickel concentrate that stainless steel mills can feed directly into their mills and make stainless steel. So this is a giant multi-billion-dollar project. It's world-class. The company's done a PEA. It's working on a PFS. They hope to have the PFS out by September of next year. But what they're also doing work on is adding a nickel sulfate conversion stage to this. And by July, they will hopefully have a press release out saying, here's the scoping study of what it costs to do this, to add this. And so this becomes of major interest to the car makers, because something like this, I mean, the tailings of this peculiar style of deposit, which is quite rare, it actually ends up the magnesium in it. Magnesium is a carbon sink. It combines with carbon dioxide in the air that's ground up fine enough, and it makes a magnesium carbonate, which is like a form of limestone, and then the carbon's packed away forever. So this project even has a chance of becoming carbon neutral, which has become the holy grail for the mining sector. Is can we somehow, with a combination of energy inputs and that, show that we do not that our output is carbon neutral. So anyways, this thing, I think this will be it should be trading 2 to 250 right now, just based on the PEA assumptions, even after you do a 20% cost escalation to account for the inflation of the past year. And if the nickel sulfate can be demonstrated, then the car makers, and as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if they're talking to this company, but if they are now seriously looking at these juniors with these unique deposits, the kind of nickel demand that they would require, the output from this 120,000 ton a year open pit mine, it could be entirely going to just one car maker's future nickel supply. And again, this has no chance of being in production before 2030. But now is the time to act, to make sure these permitting pipelines cycles get underway, because if they expect the EV adoption to go exponential when we hit the 30s, all this raw material supply needs to be put in place now, which is why I think we're in a special window for sort of a secular bull market for resource juniors. I can't speak for gold, that's a separate concept, but for all these other metals, I think we're on the threshold of a significant return to a bull cycle for these juniors. And the final one, and this is the treat for your audience, I've only introduced this to paying subscribers. This is part of my main Lithium Mania 2.0, Brunswick Exploration. It's Bob Wares, who was the original founder of Osisko's Malartic operation. He had a tremendous success with his stake in Arizona Mining, which South 32 bought for $2 billion. He's the largest shareholder of this company, which was involved in some African stuff before that crashed and burned. They've reorganized the company. And it's funny, right around here, he looked at the lithium space, and it was like $2-3 a pound. And he was aware of pegmatites and that, and said, it's hopeless. You just can't make money with pegmatites. And then when the election happened and we had the big explosion of lithium interest and suddenly optimism that EVs would become reality, he started looking at it again. And lithium price, of course, spiked over $30. So he and his other partner in the company, Killian Charles, they have been going through all the archives going back 50, 60, 70 years even, digging through where all these pegmatites were documented. Because as I mentioned earlier, many of these pegmatites were found, but they were worthless because you had a few giant deposits like Greenbushes and Panko, which supplied all of the world's needs while mining only a fraction of their resource. So it was kind of like, you've got Arashaf or niobium, what do you need any other deposit for? And he thought it might be a waste of time because he figured others would be on the ball and have already done that. But it turned out it's not the case. So in the past 5 months, they've staked all these pegmatite trends with known pegmatite showings. And they don't know which one of them are just the infertile ones or the ones which are the LCT type that have spodumene potential. But they're going to spend the summer visiting all of them, boots on the ground with an XRF machine. They know what the geochemical signature is of the fertile ones. They'll go there, map them all, make sure they have size. They don't want these skinny, 1 to 5 meter wide things that are going to be like some horrible gold underground gold vein mine. They're going to want the ones that are open pittable. And with these projects, large project areas that they staked in Quebec, in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and now even in Newfoundland, this is the kind of company which could end up having dozens of pegmatite projects on the go. And it's a bottom fish at this stage because it's early stage. They just raised $3 million. That's enough to take them through this next stage. And when they start unveiling everything that's going to happen, I think you're going to see the market really embrace this company as not just a single little pegmatite showing solution, but a large scale. This is bottom fishing for pegmatites in action. That's what I do with companies. I scour the whole universe. I look for the ones that are interesting, look at them closer, present them to the audience, and see what happens to them. And that's going to be the same thing that they do. So this Brunswick exploration, I think it's going to become a very successful junior.
Well, definitely, John, I very much appreciate here with the Brunswick exploration. Thank you very much for that. And on that note, when we're talking about your website and stuff like that, Kaiser Watch, there you go. So that's what I was going to bring up first, so our viewers can see where they can go. I'll be putting up a link right over here on the screen so that the people can just click on the link to be able to get to your website. I'll also be supplying it in the description below if people want to be able to click in there. Can you just explain to us a little bit so that our viewers know what they can get from over here when they come and see? Well, they already know it anyways because they've seen this show, but would you like to get into it just a little bit and explain here?
Yeah, I do a weekly audio show called Kaiser Watch, which runs from 30 to 40 minutes, where I address some macro topic, and then I talk about these favorites. I no longer bother restricting favorites to paying subscribers. The $4.50 a year fee is for access to the entire research platform. It covers all the Australian and Canadian listed resource companies. It's got a powerful search engine. If you know what you're looking for, you'll be able to find it. But within it, I cultivate or curate a collection of bottom fish rated companies where they all have some sort of missing piece. In the case of Brunswick, it has been the company's rollout of their strategy, making it more visible. And when these missing pieces fall into place and the stock is doubled or tripled, then I'll make it a free favorite, which I will talk about in Kaiser Watch. And it'll also, anything I publish about it will be unrestricted on the website. So for your $450 a year, you get access to this entire system. I have a Slack forum, which I extend as a privilege to the members. We collaborate there. People post comments. I do a lot of commentary on the fly there. So we're kind of like an incubator. It's not for everybody, but for those who are sophisticated out there, it's well worth the $450. At some point when we're in a raging bull market for the resource sector, I will turn this into $2,000 to $5,000 a year membership, grandfather all the existing people who stuck with me during the tough times, and then carry this on as kind of like an elite type of club with the free stuff made available when it is already a success. So now's the time to check it out, become a member, and participate in this emergence of what I think will be a great resource junior bull cycle.
Well, you know what, that $450 a year, and you're going to be grandfathering that in once these prices go up. Viewers should be taking that into consideration, and strongly recommend everybody really look into this, because very interesting stuff. John, I want to thank you so much for being here today on Betweenplays Stock Market Strategies, and I would really love to be able to have you in the future to do one of these talks again.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about this stuff in a relaxed manner. I really enjoyed doing this.
Thank you so much, and wishing you all the best. And to the next video that we have you on. Thank you, John, and we'll be seeing you soon.
You're welcome.